Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Laying down on the job. Last video we just finished the CG on our RC CG machine with the Boomerang Atom or FTL Lancer, and we're going to do our engine run now. That's how this video is starting, is with our engine run. Looking forward to it. Snaked you a little bit in the last video. So we're going to add some fuel to this plane. We are going to get it off the CG machine, get it in front of our door, and let's test run this Swewin 190 in this 2-meter plane. It's going to be nuts. All right, so what's the point of this test run? Well, we already know the engine runs well because we ran it on the test stand previously. So what I want to do is a couple things. I want to check when we've got the engine running that our vectored thrust nozzle, when that pipe expands and heats up, I just want to check and see how it looks. Now, I may not be able to see anything. It may be a very small change. It may be very obvious. So we'll see how that works out. But we want to get the engine running. We want to learn it to the new fuel system. And that's kind of the point of all this. Now, before I turn this plane on, we've made a bunch of changes to everything. So, you know, the elevators, one of them was reversed and so on and so forth. So we need to reprogram our Cortex. So we've got our Cortex plug right there. We're going to put a bind plug in there, turn this on, and do our normal Cortex programming. Now, I'm not going to share that with you because we've covered it in previous Atom videos, and also I have specific videos on that setup. So I'm going to put the bind plug in, go through the setup, we'll come back and get this engine running. All right, guys, so as we go through this, I will put some descriptions up on the screen of what's going on. Obviously, we've got our turbine dashboard and all that stuff, so let's fire this thing up and see how she goes. And yes, we've got our fire extinguisher standing by, all the safety equipment. I've got ear protection that I haven't put on yet, but I will put on very soon. Okay, so we've got a bunch of air bubbles. They're starting to make their way out. right, so my initial thoughts from that test run, a couple things. We required a ton of sub trim on our pitch and yaw for the vectored thrust. The heat on the pipe definitely makes a big difference. So I added probably about 20 points of sub trim to those servos to make them to make it look relatively centered. So what that means is now we need to go in and we need to reprogram our Cortex one more time, because when we start the plane up, we probably won't get our double bump, and it probably won't recognize those things because they're so far out of trim. With the engine idled up or throttled up and you use the pitch, it's crazy. Like, you can lift the tail off almost off the crate that it's sitting on, so nuts. Very effective, very, very effective. Also gives me an idea of what we're gonna do on the different flight modes that we're gonna set up as well too. That's coming further in this video. Engine runs great, nice and smooth. Nice throttle band, lots of power when I'm holding on. Obviously, we'll have to figure all that out while we're flying, but test run, very good, very successful. When we got the canopy on as well too, there's a lot of air being sucked into the intakes and the nose, so, but the canopy has just a little bit of suction, like hardly any at all. And then if you cover one of the intakes, you can see the canopy suck in a little bit, so perfect setup, I think, for that. This is gonna be a fun plane. All right, guys, so now we can get into some of the finer details. So since we're already here, we might as well check our gyro movements. So the gyro is always going to move in the direction you move the surface. So when we take this aileron and lift it up, the gyro moves it up. When we move the elevator down, the gyro is going to move the elevator down. The rudder, when you're standing at the rear, moves it in the direction that you're moving the tail. We can also check our vectored thrust nozzle. That's doing the same thing. So when I move this down, it's moving the vectored nozzle down. Perfect. So gyros all work in the same way. And when I check the gyro, I'll usually go to full flaps. And the reason I go to full flaps is because that's where we've got our highest gain. So I've got minus 75 on landing, minus 60 on takeoff, and 35 for normal flying. Those are just numbers that we use. They're default numbers. Usually 35 to 40 is perfect. All right, so we'll shut down the Atom. We're almost out of fuel, so we don't have to worry about draining the fuel. All right, so we've got the manual pulled up on the computer here. So initially I'm going to set things up sort of as that goes. So ailerons 10 up, 10 down. Not sure if that's tip or root, probably tip, I would assume. Elevator 13 up, down. Rudder as much as you can get without binding, and then flaps 30 and 50. So we'll get things queued up for that. All right, so just turned plane on, and even we trimmed out the vectored nozzle, and it's still bound fine, which is cool. So what we want to do is I'm going to show you kind of how we work things in our radio. So we've got dual rates and expo, so we've got some things set up here, but everything initially is global. The reason it's all global is so when we make these initial setups, we don't have to do all of our flight modes. Now, when we add more flight modes because of the vectored thrust, we'll go in and deal with that, but I'm just doing the initial setup here. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to just make sure that our surfaces are centered. And for that, I'm going to go into the model, servo setup, and we're going to set up our servos. Now, we're always doing the first servo. Elevator 1 is our left, elevator 2 is our right. So we're just a fraction off there. We'll make a couple adjustments, 2 clicks. Perfect. Elevator right, I think 2 clicks. And that I'm just doing in the sub-trim menu. So that's fine. Okay, next thing I want to do is I want to get our elevators equalized. This is something that I see people not doing often. So the way I do this is we can go full deflection on our elevators, and Maybe I'll give you guys a side shot here. Now I'm giving you the side shot so you can see what I'm actually doing here to get this. So I'm going full deflection up, putting my head down. This is like what we do with the flaps. And I'm just making my right surface here disappear, comparing it to my left. So right there, the right's disappeared, the left, I can still see surface. So we've got to either reduce the travel on our right or increase the travel on our left. So I'm going to reduce the travel on our right. So how we do that is elevator 2. If I pull back stick, that goes into the minuses. So we're going to reduce our negative a little bit to reduce that surface travel. So that is what we're doing. So now our negative, when I go up elevator, is traveling a little bit less on the right one. Now let's go check. Now we probably have way too much travel on the elevators. I'm not worried about that right now. I'm just worried about getting our surfaces equalized. So that was a bit too much. There. And you can also compare it on the other side, the underside of the surface. That looks good. So now the reason I do that is when I pull up elevator to go up with the plane, if our elevators are traveling at different rates, the plane's going to skew off to the side. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing on the forward elevator, and chances are this servo, our left servo, is now going to be traveling too far. That's kind of the common. This one gets a little bit tricky because you have to get way down low. So yeah, our left servo is traveling way too far. So I'm going to go to elevator 1 now, which is our left elevator. When I push forward elevator, that also goes into the negative on the servo side. So we're going to go here, we're going to go to the negative, exactly what we did, and reduce that number. So 6 points brings us not quite enough. That looks pretty good. So I was checking it on the underside of the surface. Now I'm going to check it on the top side of the surface. And when I check the top side, that looks good. It's these little setup things that make your plane fly way better. So now our servos are traveling equal up and down. Perfect. So elevator is, servo-wise, is good. Now we are going to check our travel. So the manual says we are looking for 13 millimeters up and down. So we'll just do an initial check here with a ruler, and we'll do it on the tip first. So at the tip, we are getting 15 millimeters of travel in up, and we are getting 15 millimeters of travel in down. So I'm going to use the tip as my reference point because that looks good. Let's check it on the left. 15 up, 15 down. That's good. That means our servos are traveling equally. So now what we can do is we can go into our dual rate menu. So I'll bring in and show you that. So we're back at the square one. We're going to go into fine tuning, dual rates. So elevator right now, we've dropped this to 90%. Our servo menu is at 80%. So we'll make our difference changes here on the dual rate menu. Now, right now, we've got this set to global. So when this is set to global, it doesn't matter what flight mode we're in, the numbers are going to stay the same. The reason I do this is to get a good starting point, and then we change this to separate. We also have gyro off, gyro on numbers. So we're going to adjust those as well too. We'll do our gyro on number first. So let's drop this to 80%. We'll keep expo at 20 for now, and we'll check this again. So that is now giving us 13 millimeters of travel and 13 millimeters of travel, which is what the manual is calling for. Now elevator, I like a decent amount of travel. That may be too much, but that's what flying is for. And adjusting it in your first flights. Okay, so let's get this set up. Flaps or gyro off. So we'll go to 80. Now, the reason we've got different numbers with gyro off and gyro on is when your gyro turns off, your natural gain or your natural expo goes away. So I'm going to put 30% expo here. Gyro off, we're going to go to 45% expo. So it's going to add 45% expo when gyro is off. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is we're going to go into the global logo and we're going to change that to separate. So now each flight mode is set up differently. Now just to prove to you that this works, so this is regular flying mode. Ooh, we've got way too much elevator in regular flying. Let's drop that down to 70%. Takeoff flaps, still 80. Landing flaps, still 80. Okay? That's the way the program is set up with the flight modes. Gyro off works in every condition, but regular flying mode, if we want to keep it the same, we want to go in here and reduce this to 70. So gyro on, gyro off. But that's why we do everything in global, because it makes those changes for you. As soon as you go to separate, you've got to adjust right now. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 different flight modes to adjust, but we're not going to get there yet. So I'm going to bump this back up to 80, back up to 80. Now we're the same in all flight modes. So elevators are done. So while we're here, we'll do our rudder. Rudder is very simple. We've got our full movement right now. I'll just tell you what our movement actually is. So we're a little off center, so I'm going to go into my servo menu. So go back to the main screen, model, servo setup, and we're going to go to our rudder servo, and we're going to add a little bit of sub trim to bring that into alignment. There we go. So that's adjusted now. And as far as travel goes, we'll just check and make sure our travel's equal. So easiest thing to do, I find, is we'll just start at the 100 mark here. So then we know each direction which way it's going. So left flap, or left rudder, sorry, you're getting 40, well that is 62 millimeters of travel, that's a lot. And then this way, 62. So we're equal both directions, which is cool. And lots of rudder travel. We've got lots available, we've maxed it out. So that's good, rudder's good. Now what I'll do from there is we're going to go menu, fine tuning. We're going to go in back into our dual rate menu, and we're going to just confirm that we're happy with this. So gyro off, gyro on. So let's add 30% expo there and 45 on gyro off. 100% travel, that's fine. Now we'll go and we'll make it separate flight modes. And now it works in separate flight modes. So gyro, on, off, and all of our different flight modes are done for the rudder. All right, next thing we're going to do is our ailerons. Now our ailerons, I'm just going to check center first. That one's nice and centered. Our other one on this side needs to be centered a little bit, so I'll just do that. Same method I've showed you guys already. There, so aileron is centered, required 4% sub trim. 4 points, 2% sub trim. All right, so the manual calls for 10 millimeters of aileron movement. I'm assuming again that's from the tip. Right now we've got 20, which is a lot. And that looks like a lot to me anyways as well. So 20 up. We've got about 20 down. So we need to reduce that in general. So let's take a look at our menu here. So we're gonna go menu, model, servo setup. So our aileron servos, we've got those dropped down to 80 and 80, which is good. All right, so now we're gonna go into our dual rate menu, fine tuning, dual rates, and let's adjust these ailerons a little bit. So we'll just do our gyro or our expo to begin with. Gyro off. And we've got that added in the switch right there is what it is. So that's our SF switch, which is our gyro on off. Now we'll drop our travel. Let's just go to 70 and see how that affects things. Okay, so we're getting like 14 millimeters. 14 millimeters. Okay, I went down to 60%. That's 12. And 12. So what I'm going to do now is I don't want to go beyond 60. So I'm going to take my ailerons and we're going to go into, I'm actually going to bump this up a little bit. So one option we have here is, so right now we've got 12 millimeters of travel, right? So if you look at our servo arm, we are on the outboard hole and we could go to the inboard hole to get better resolution. That one's going to be a little bit tough because it is getting close. So maybe I'll keep it where it is. We'll just drop the servo down a little bit more and hopefully that'll help out. So I bumped that back up to 70. Let's go into our model servo setup. So let's bump our servos on our ailerons to 70. Now, you could also adjust your max positive limit as well too. The max positive is, this is the limit before any mixes are added. So if you were to put crow in on this wing and still have your full travel or have lots of travel, you may reach the mechanical limit and damage something. So that's where the max positive limit comes into things. But we won't get into that right now. So we've left that where it is. Okay, so now we'll check our travel again. It's looking better. Okay, so now we're at 12 again. And now we can go in and adjust that dual rate menu a little bit more. So now we're at 60%. And that's giving us 10 millimeters bang on. But we're centered, we've got good travel there, and the ailerons are traveling correctly. Okay, so with ailerons done, now we're going to go back to our menu here. So just confirming, change it to separate. So we're all set up there. And if you go to the main screen here, you can see all the numbers change as well, obviously from the main screen. So now that our aileron's done on this side, I'm just going to confirm on our other side that we're happy and we're getting the same travel on this side. So I'll just go to a number like 30 as an example, as the center point, 10, and 10. So we're even on our aileron surface. All right, so now all of our surfaces are correct and moving properly. Now we're going to get into our flaps. So we use the butterfly flap menu. My default model has all of this set up already, and we are going to go into our flap adjustment. So as we've talked about during the assembly of this project, We just put the arbitrary number, got things kind of set up here on flaps off, and that's where we're at. So what we can do is we can go in now. You can see here the different changes. S1, left flap, S2, right flap. So I can go in and adjust these things separately. This left flap is correct, centered compared to the aileron. Our right flap, we need to bring that up just a little bit. So we go take off symmetrical, we go to here, pick our right flap, and we're going to adjust that flap separately from the left one. Didn't take much. Beautiful. So now that flap is centered to our aileron, which is centered to our wingtip. So we ended up with the left flap at -125, the right flap at -128. So now I'm going to hit OK. So for our next flap adjustments, I want to take the plane and get it on the ground. All right, guys, so for flaps, I'm just using visual here. I'm not doing anything else. On a normal sports jet setup, I would be doing a mechanical setup at full flaps, and we can do that using an angle finder, etc., etc. On this plane, because we don't have the mechanical setup at full flaps, we're doing flaps off as our first stage, and then we're going to do takeoff flaps or half flaps, and then landing flaps, all visually. So what I do here is I'm going to go to takeoff flaps, and I just, hopefully I can show you this on camera, just run your head down until the top of the surface disappears, and you can visually see if those guys are the same or not. So when I do this, I can see that my left flap is not traveling as much as my right flap. So what I do is the same thing here. I take off symmetrical, I go in here, and I can adjust these things separately. So I'm going to actually take off a little bit of the right flap. Don't worry about what the numbers say, it's just what it happens to be doing. So now when I run my head down like that, really close there, perfect. I think that's good. So both flaps, I can see the same profile on the top of both of the flaps. And then I'm going to go to full flaps. Now full flaps in the manual call for 50 millimeters of travel, which isn't very much at all. Now I've got a lot of travel in there, so maybe I'll show you from the side here. You can see there, lots of flap travel. I don't have a problem with that. I'd rather have more flap travel. I'm going to take a little bit off, I think. This plane's nice because it's easy to adjust, right? On like my Carf Rebel Classic, you have to go in and make a mechanical change. So that is one of the advantages of not having the mechanical full flap setup. All right, so I did measure my, my right flap, and I am running 60 millimeters right now. That's measured from the aileron to the flap. The manual calls for 50. It's a good compromise, I think. But right now, I don't know again if I can show this to you, but right now when I do that profile view with my eyes, they are very, very similar. Yeah, that's good. I like that. It's a little hard to see on the gray textured floor, but really close. Yeah, like that. Perfect. So that's how I set up flaps. And then easy to add more if we want later on. All right, so as far as regular flying goes, that is the regular flying setup on this aircraft. There's nothing else that we would need to do other than fly it and make some small adjustments as we feel necessary. Now, typically what I'll do when I fly it is I'll say, okay, when I take off, I want a little bit more elevator. When I'm in landing flaps, I want a little bit less elevator, whatever it ends up being. Obviously, we've got maybe to add some elevator compensation. The manual doesn't talk about that at all, so I don't know if it needs any elevator compensation. But because we're using flight modes, the trim is separate in each flight mode. I'll show you that. Okay, so if we go back to the main screen, and if we add, let's say we're in regular flying mode here, and we need a bunch of up trim on our elevator. Well, when we go to half flaps, takeoff flaps, it goes back to 0. So all of our flight modes are separate trims. Gyro on and off, that doesn't affect anything. It's just our flight modes that have separate trims. That's important because you want to be able to trim your flaps while you're flying. So that's generally something we'll do on the maiden. We're going to go to our trim setting and everything and get all that set up when we maiden the plane. Now, the only other thing to think about right now is our vectored thrust is working all of the time, and that's something we want to be able to turn off. So we're going to get into that stuff a little bit more. Now, one thing I like to do in a scenario like this is we're going to start to get into vectored thrust items. I've never dealt with this before. So what I'll do is I'm going to make a copy of this model so I have the model saved in its current state. I'll show you how to do that. All right, so we don't need the model turned on anymore, so we'll turn it off. Now we're going to go into Menu, Model, Select Model, and we've got our atom up here. So we're just going to copy the atom, and we're going to make it copy. There we go. So now the atom copy is here. Our regular atom is there. So now, if we go in and program this and mess it up and screw it up and do stuff that we can't reverse easily, we just have another model that we can bind to, and it's already set up in the state that we've currently got it set up in. All right, so I know what I want to do with the radio. I don't know how to do it with the radio, but I've kind of played around and figured it out. So here's what my goal is. So I made a couple changes on my radio. This was a 3-position switch, and this was a 2-position switch. Now, I've got a couple switches on order, so we'll play around with that afterwards, but I took those switches, flipped them on the DS24G2. It's super easy. Anyway, so we've got a 3-position switch here now, and we've got our 2-position switch there. I don't use this for anything other than lights, so eventually I think we're going to put that on a 3-position switch, but we've also got that, which can be a 3-position switch too. So anyways, it doesn't really matter. But so this is going to be our hover and vector thrust switch. That's my goal with this. So what do I want to be able to do with the atom? I want to be able to fly normal, which is fine. We've got those flight modes set up. Everything's already set up for that. But I want to be able to turn the vectored thrust on in a normal flying scenario and be able to do, like, you know, tail whips and hammerheads and all that kind of stuff, fun stuff. But I don't want it to be, and like Harriers and things like that, but I don't want it to be heading hold. And then I also want a hovering mode. So that's the purpose of this switch. So regular flying mode, vectored on, and hovering mode. Now the hovering mode, the point of that is the tail cone or vectored thrust nozzle, that's going to be in heading hold mode, and that's going to hold the plane basically still is the goal. So there's a lot of things to work through, but I think I've wrapped my brain around it. So what I did was I made that copy earlier in the video, and I went in and played with the copy. I messed around with the copy, added a bunch of things, played around with it, deleted the copy. I've now made another copy, so I've got it again, and I'm going to go into the actual model that's bound to the radio, and we'll play around with that and see if we can get this figured out. So there's quite a few steps to do, so let's dive in. All right, so very first thing I want to do is we're going to go into the original model, which we're in, and we're going to go into function assignments. So when I was initially setting this plane up, I set our pitch and our yaw functions just on our sticks so we could play around with them. If you look closely, you'll see the little dial gauge or the little bar graph there moving, right? So we're going to get rid of this now, and if we clear that out and clear out our yaw, so now our pitch and our yaw are locked in, not moving. That's fine. We want to make these mixes now. With the mixes, we've got more control over them, and that's the right step for moving forward. So we're going to escape out of this, go back to the main screen. Actually, let me make sure that that held. Yes, sometimes in the Jetty radio, you have to push OK for things to be stuck there. If you push the escape button, it cancels it. Okay, so we're going to go back to the main screen, fine-tuning, free mixes. So we want to add another mix from rudder to yaw. So this is going to be our vectored thrust on setting. So it's going to be the center setting on the radio. So we're going to go to advanced, and there we go. So we'll keep that as global for now. I think that works because we're going to set up some other flight modes too. So master value, this tells you how much the thing is actually going to move. So if we put this at, let's go with 60%. Switch, we want it to be on in the middle. And if we go to our curve and look, there you go. You can see there we're getting 60% of our original movement. Now I don't think we want any expo in there or anything like that, so we'll just leave this where it is right now. And that is that. So we'll go to regular flying mode, vector is off. There we go. So now let's set up another mix for our hover mode. So we'll go out of there, we're going to go add from rudder to yaw, master value, oops, and we'll just go 100. Switch, we want to go up to our hover mode, and if we go to the curve, you'll see that it's following the existing curve because we're using 100%. So that is that. So now we've got our two mixes set up for the rudder to yaw. Now we need to do our pitch. So we'll add another one from elevator to pitch. We'll just do it right here. So 60%, we'll do the same thing. Switch, we want to go to there. And then we'll add another mix from elevator to pitch. And this one we'll do our hover mode, so we'll go 100%. And we're in our full up position on the switch. And there we go. So now we've got our vectored thrust on and our hover mode. So that's set up there. Now if we go back to our servo view here, we can see that our elevators are working, but our pitch, number 5, is not doing anything. If we go to vector on mode, the pitch is working, and all the way to hover mode, and it's working. So that's good. So we know that switch is working. All right, so we got everything figured out with the flight modes. So what I ended up doing was deleting my flight modes, kind of starting over again and making sure I was okay with everything. So what we ended up doing was now we've got our regular flight modes that we had before, plus we've got our vector and our hover, which was called Viper right now, but that's because we don't have hover. So anyways, flight mode 1, defaults, vector on, hover, takeoff mode, landing flow, flaps. So flight modes are sorted out. What I did as well was go into our flaps and confirm that everything was good there. So this is our previous setup. So we've got flaps off as minus 127, take off flaps, full flaps, and then I wanted our vector hover, of course, to be flaps off, right? So that's where that's set up now. So that's done. So next thing to consider, of course, is our adjusting of everything. So we can do this a couple different ways. Obviously, the first way is our mixes. So we've got our two different mixes, which is fine. And I can adjust our stuff here. But the other thing we can do is we can also adjust the amount of travel on this in our dual rate menu. So if we were to go down to our pitch and yaw, we have the ability to also turn these off in the other, or adjust the amount of travel, I guess is the better way to say it. Because in our mix only works in these two flight modes. So you could set these to 0 in all of your other flight modes and then not even have the mix, or, you know, there's lots of different ways to go about it. I'm just thinking about adjusting it and how I want to adjust it. I think I'm going to leave this off for now, and we're going to keep things simple, and maybe eventually we'll adjust the pitch and the yaw here, but I'm going to keep everything in my mix menu. So during the vector on stage, if I want more than 60% travel, then I'll adjust it here. With our hovering, I'm going to keep that at 100 here, and that should be fine. Now if we go into our servo setup for those servos, pitch, we've only got 80% travel. Yaw, we've got 85% travel, so we do have some more travel available on our servos as well. All right, so we've gone in and set up some additional gyro positions that relate to the flight mode. So we have our standard flight modes, and then we've got our hover flight mode. So that still goes to minus 60. So everything is just in, vector on flight mode. So everything's just in adjustment mode. And then you'll see when I go to hover mode, we go to the positive side, which is the green side on the gyro. So that'll be heading hold. Now, all of my surfaces aren't going to stay in heading hold, but we want our tail cone to stay in heading hold. So we'll go into the gyro and adjust this stuff, but I'm just setting up the basics to get us there. All right, guys, I'm just showing you the LED for the Cortex. It's right in the center of the screen. It's the green LED. So that means that the aircraft is now in heading hold mode. So all of our surfaces are in heading hold mode. So not only our vectored thrust nozzle, so if you watch that, it's adjusting and stays there, right? So that's the key. So when we're hovering or want to be locked in, that's where we're at. Now, all of our surfaces are currently on heading hold mode. I don't know if we'll keep them there, but that is the option that we have in that mode. So that is hovering mode, vector on goes to normal gyro mode, where things are just like the normal surfaces, they react and then come back. All right, so that pretty much takes care of our initial flight mode setup and all of our gyro setup. Now we're going to go through and check a few things. So I'm just going to go in to Device Explorer. Just want to take a look at the Cortex again and make sure we're still good. Now we do have all the adjustments here in this this menu on the Jetty. So we can go into single channel gain as an example. I did turn my rudder down a little bit. That's something that happens on the Cortexes, is the rudder channel defaults to a fairly high number initially, but that is all that. So channel 7 is the rudder. We can also go into our individual items. So yellow is the amber color, which is like normal flying mode. Green is the heading hold mode. So if we go into green for rudder, you can see there, hold, elevator, and aileron. So we could actually turn aileron off from hold if we wanted to. There's lots of different adjustments in here. And if you go into the normal mode or the amber mode or yellow mode, it says normal there, right? So, and you also have the ability here to adjust your individual items. So the reason I turned the rudder channel down versus the gyro gain here and the gyro gain here is I want my rudder to be a little bit lower gain, not my pitch and yaw, right? So that's the important thing, is my yaw and my rudder are both using the same portion of the gyro as the other surfaces. The elevator and pitch are using the same surfaces of the gyro. So that's why, you know, you can adjust part of the gyro or you could adjust the other part of the gyro. You just need to be mindful of that. We can turn our lock in way up, right? So we could leave that. Default was 4. We'll go up to 6 just because it's in the hover mode is the only time we're going to use that. And we'll turn maybe our gyro gain up to 14. So we'll go 14 and 6 on both of them. That's just in the green mode. And then we'll leave our normal mode the way it is. So that's fine. I'll turn my gyro off. So that's the other thing to check, is we're going to go into our gyro menu. And I think I can hear that it's working properly, but we want to make sure that this gyro switch turns everything off all the time. So this is our hover mode. Vector on, gyro off. Flight mode 1, gyro off. Okay, so in this position, gyro off doesn't work. That's why we want to check these things. So this needs to be 0. So regular flying mode, if we go gyro off, there we go. That's important to double check all these things.
Gyro on. Take off mode half, full flaps 0. Take off mode half, flight mode 1. Gyro off. Gyro on. Take off. Gyro off. Gyro on. Full flap. Gyro off. Gyro on.
There we go.
Mode 1. Vector. Viper. Gyro off. Gyro on. Gyro off. Gyro on. Flight. Gyro off.
Perfect.
Gyro on.
There. So now we're good there. We've checked our gyro. We'll go into dual rates. Check all of our flight modes.
Flight mode 1. Take off full flaps.
So those are the same for all of our flight modes. Gyro off are the same for all of our flight modes. That's good. Awesome. All right, now we want to go in and set up some warnings and stuff. So let's go in and set that up. So we can go in and set up some alarms. I think that's alarms. We'll edit this one. So enable it, pick the sensor, telemetry sensor. So when our fuel, and the condition is less than 0 milliliters, so yes. When the condition is less than our chosen condition, so this is where you want to, so when you push the menu button here, it changes the number. So we'll go up by hundreds. So half a tank is right there. So we want to go fuel level.
Fuel level 50%.
Fuel level 50%.
Fuel level 50%. Fuel level 50%. Fuel level 50%. Fuel level 50%.
Okay, we don't want it constantly repeating, so we're going to turn off our repeat to 3.
Level 50%. Fuel level 50%. Fuel level 50%.
There we go. So now we're good. So when this is at 50% fuel, it's going to let us know. Now 50% fuel would be, yeah, I guess that's roughly 50% from the full condition, right, which is 4.5 liters. So that's fine. The other thing we've got set up is
Timer 6 minutes 0 seconds.
Timer. And I used to have, I think on my other models, I've got that set up. So I'm going to go to one of my other models and it'll tell us how to do that. So I'm going to turn this model off. Okay, I figured it out on my BDX already here. So if we go to timer sensors, voice output, it basically just erased the sensor that it was picking up on. So sensors and variables, sorry, single voice announcement, and we go to here. So the switch is actually our radio tilting, so our GY. You get to pick where that goes. And then our sensor is fuel in percentage. So when I'm flying, if I want to know what my fuel level is,
0%.
There you go. So we can set that up on the Atom. Okay, so we'll go timer sensors, voice output. We've got our single voice announcement. We'll add it. Our switch is the accelerometer, and it's our GY axis.
Timer 6 minutes 0 seconds.
So you have to get this set up. So it's on. So this is basically picking where it turns on. So if I'm here holding my radio level, it's fine, and then I got to give it a pretty big tilt for it to work. So that's good. There we go. So if you look at the GY, you can see it change to a check mark when it works. And then we'll go sensor, telemetry, we'll go to fuel. Now on the Chikois, on my other airplanes, it tells you a percentage. On this one, it's going to say fuel in milliliters, I'm assuming. Let's see what it says.
4,500 milliliters.
There we go. So it tells us our milliliters
4,500 milliliters.
Rather than percentage. And I think that's just the nature of the SWIWIN setup, but we've also got at 50% our alarm that's going to come on.
4,500 milliliters.
And then we're also going to set up another alarm at the 30% mark. So 4,500 times 30% is 1,350. So we're going to go to alarms, fuel, so sensor, telemetry, fuel in milliliters, enabled. When we're less than 13, we'll go 1350. So when we're less than 1350, it tells us
fuel level 30%.
There you go.
Level 30%. Fuel level 30%. Fuel level 30%. Fuel level 30%. Fuel level 30%.
Perfect. So that's another one that we set up. Now we can also set up a flame out. So if you are flying at a busy field or you've got 2 or 3 pilots up in the air at the same time, you can't hear your turbine running. So it's nice to have an alarm that signifies when you have a flame out or if you have a flame out. So I like to get that set up as well too. So let's do the same thing. Okay, so we'll add sensor, telemetry, and this is going to be our RPM. So vSpeak RPM enabled. So when our condition is less than This idles at 38,000 RPM. So when our condition is less than, let's say, 32,000 RPM, because that's going to signify a flame out, we want to have the flame out warning. Repeat 3 times. And this sounds like,
flame out.
There we go. And now you can set up an activation switch here as well too. So the activation switch can be our trimmer. So it only works when our trim is at 100%. So when our trim's off, that switch is no longer active. So the only time this is active is now. And then we can also set up a vibration alarm. So we'll do left 1 long. So that basically was going to vibrate our left stick 1 long vibration.
Flame out.
And I just felt it, so that was our test here.
Flame out.
Flame out.
Flame out.
There we go. Perfect, so now that's set up as well. So hopefully that gives you an idea of some of the basics and the alarms and that kind of stuff that you can set up with this thing. Nuts. All right, so another thing I've noticed here is we're in regular flying mode. Vectored thrust is off, but the gyro is still compensating on that surface. So you can see there, elevator is compensating. It might be hard to see in the video, but it's still compensating. If we go to full flaps, where our gain's higher, you can see there, it's still compensating. We don't want that. So that's a good reason that we want to use our dual rate expo menu for pitch and yaw. Because what's happening is the gyro is still compensating even though those aren't active. They're only supposed to be active. The mix is only supposed to be active in this flight mode, but because our master is active, that's what's doing it. So let's go take a look at our mix first here and see. So because our rudder is active, that's what's doing it. Now I don't know if the flight mode here makes a difference, so let's make that separate and that separate and see what happens. So gyro on, full flaps. So that still does it. We'll hit OK and go out of there. Yeah, so still doing it there.
0 miles per hour. Flight mode gyro off.
And then we'll go here and we'll edit this and just see if there's anything that we can do. So yeah, the switch is supposed to be active only there.
Flight mode 1.
Yeah, I'm going to play around with this a little bit and see if we just need to use that dual rate menu. All right, I'm going to try and be brief with this explanation. So what I was trying to do was, during regular flying, I didn't want the tail to be compensating on the nozzle. So that's what I was trying to work around. And basically what I ended up doing was going into our gyro, so cortex, and going to our single channel gain, turning the vectored nozzle off on the yellow bank. And then on the green bank, we still have 5 and 6, which is our vectored nozzle, at 100%. So what that effectively does is, so we're in regular flying mode, flaps are up, right? The vectored nozzle is not doing anything, it's locked in place, and the control of the vectored nozzle is also locked in place. If we go to vectored nozzle flight mode, what happens now is our vectored nozzle does not move with the gyro, but we've got control of our vectored nozzle. So this is like regular flying around, and you want to do some hammerheads and tumbles and stuff like that. We don't need gyro control on this as far as I'm concerned. And then we've got hover mode, which puts the entire plane in its current setup into heading hold mode. Now we can change that, and we could put all of our surfaces in regular mode and our, I think, maybe. But anyways, when I go to hover mode, all of our surfaces are in heading hold mode, and you can see here our vectored nozzle is very active doing its thing, as are our surfaces. So those are 3 setups here with the aircraft. All right, guys, and that wraps up the Boomerang Atom, aka FTL Lancer aircraft build. Tons of fun. I really enjoyed putting this together. Also enjoyed sharing some more of the details behind the Jetty program that we're using on this plane. Right now it's kind of mid-January 2025, and we'll be maidening this plane at Tucson Jets mid-March. So if you're coming to the event, we'll have this plane there along with some other fun planes. If you have any questions about this aircraft, you can list them down below. You can also contact me, thelightersideofrc@gmail.com. Thanks guys for tuning in. Thanks for watching the series, and we'll see you in the next video.